Hello and good evening, and welcome to the second and final day of a CSGS Mehfil celebrating 6 years of the Center. The Center for Studies in Gender and Sexuality is a center of excellence at Ashoka and has been going strong since its inception in 2015. Apart from being an intellectual hub for students and faculty at Ashoka to spark conversations on the deeper questions we ask of gender and sexuality, the center has also brought together scholars, activists, and practitioners from across the world to speak to each other and share ideas and practices that span across borders and cultures. We had a wonderful evening. We had a wonderful segment last evening, and we have curated an equally exciting one today, which you will all get to see shortly. I'll now hand it over to Nandita. Nandita Datta used to work previously at CSGS, and she is also the author of a fabulous book that we highly recommend called F-Rated to Being a Woman Filmmaker in India. Nandita will be facilitating the first segment this evening. On that note, just quickly, I would like to announce that we have organized another giveaway this evening. We have three incredible books, and one of them is F-rated. So if you would like to receive a copy, we suggest you keep watching today's session. Okay, so all over to you, Nandita.
Thank you very much, Neil. That was an incredibly generous introduction. So, thank you for this opportunity, and I would now begin by introducing the panelists. Panelists, if you could put your cameras on. So we have with us today Paromita Vohra, Madhu Menon, and Shiv Sharma. Paromita is a filmmaker, writer, and dedicated Antakshari player, as she likes to call herself, whose work explores feminism, love, desire, urban life, and popular culture. She's the founder and creative director of Agents of ISHQ, India's best loved website about sex, love, and desire. She's also made documentaries such as Unlimited Girls, Q2P, Morality TV or Loving Jihad, Ek Manohar Kahani, and Where's Sandra, among others. She writes a weekly column, Paranormal Activity, in Sunday Midday. Our second panelist, Madhu Menon, is Professor of English and Director of the Center for Studies in Gender and Sexuality at Ashoka. Her most recent book, Infinite Variety, A History of Desire in India, puts into conversation major ideas of queer theory with the history of ideas in India. And her upcoming book project is titled The Law of Desire. Shiv Sharma is one of the former founding members of the CSGS and has worked in various capacities at the center in the last few years. He's a past recipient of the Fulbright Scholarship and is currently pursuing a PhD in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Emory University. So the way we will do this is I will pose 3 or 4 rounds of questions, after which we'll open the floor to audience questions. And I'll just start with my first question, which is, you'll have to bear with me, it's a bit long-winded, but it's more of a prompt for your thoughts rather than a question. And so what I was thinking is that it seems to me that we are at a critical cultural political juncture right now, where a number of things are happening. So while on the one hand, interreligious love is being labeled as jihad, we are being constantly bombarded by this right-wing protectionist discourse, where as Bahu Betis, we are not only being infantilized, but being told that we need to be protected from being seduced. On the other hand, as Paromita and Madhavi have repeatedly pointed out in their work, that the so-called liberal attitude, and here Madhavi, I'm borrowing your words, the liberal attitude operates by being the flip side to the reactionary attitude. So the so-called liberal discourse also does not offer a language to speak about female or queer desire, intimacy, and pleasure outside of the language of violence and oppression. So my question to all 3 of you panelists is that how do we as feminists respond to this current moment? And it's a 2-pronged question, actually. I also wanted to ask, while we are talking about desire, pleasure, intimacy, who are we really speaking for? And here I wanted to refer to this High Court judgment from the Madhya Pradesh High Court, the state that I come from, which I came across yesterday. So, typical story. This was an interreligious love affair. The boy was Muslim, the girl was Hindu, and the girl's family alleged that the boy had been raping the girl for 2 years on the pretext of marriage, while the boy maintains that it was a consensual love affair and they know it was a sexual relationship that was consented for, and he changed his mind about being able to marry her after 2 years. And the judge refused bail to the guy in this case, quoting that, and I just kind of will paraphrase the judgment, that India is a conservative society, and barring some exceptions, it has not yet reached such level of civilization where unmarried girls, regarding of their religion, indulge in carnal activities with boys just for the fun of it, unless the same is backed by some future promise or assurance of marriage. So, this to me is really kind of emblematic of the registers in which we are able to speak of female desire. And so I wanted to, I kind of gave my questions beforehand. So, how do we as feminists respond to this moment? How do we create a conversation about desire and pleasure? And Madhavi, since you're writing about the law of desire, I was wondering if you'd like to go first.
Sure, although I usually always love following Paromita's lead, but at least I know she's here, and so that's good, and Shiv too. It's interesting, Nandita, I was actually in Madhya Pradesh for the last 4 days and just got back last night. And so not to answer your question directly as yet, but I was in Mandu, and the guide who took us around Rupmati's Mehfil, Rupmati's pavilion, was telling us a story about her love affair, the love affair between Rupmati and Baz Bahadur, which of course today would be termed love jihad. But in his version of it and in his rendition of it, and I must remember, or I must remind you all that he was Muslim, so he was being very careful. In his version of it, there was no sex at all involved in any of this. And the only passion that was involved was that of poetry.
Seem to have lost Madhavi there.
Yes. Paromita, do you? Oh, she's back.
Oh, okay. Am I back? Did I disappear?
Yes.
I just thought all of you had disappeared. See, I thought the world was circling around me. I was just saying anyway, so I think I got caught off when I said how for the guide, there was no sex or anything at all in this relationship. The passion was entirely about poetry and music. And he said very clearly, Rupmati said to Baz Bahadur, I cannot marry you because I am a Hindu and you are a Muslim. And I didn't say anything, but I very clearly wanted to say, I'm sure to the guide that she said nothing of the kind. But this was a sort of overlaying of 21st century current day rhetoric onto a story that has actually withstood for centuries this kind of co-optation into a register of sexual purity and religious purity. Now, the trouble always with women's desire, or the trouble always with passions that don't toe the line, is that they are always on the anvil whenever there's a political crisis imminent. So you're talking about a religious crisis, it's about women's sexuality. You're talking about the crisis in Afghanistan, it's about women's sexuality. You're talking about environmental crisis, it's about women's sexuality. It's always about women's sexuality and always about policing it. And so here we are at a moment in which we are crisis ridden in India. And so it's actually no surprise at all that women's sexuality should be the one that is erupting from everywhere as the thing that needs to be monitored, as the thing that needs to be policed, from the Madhya Pradesh High Court to the Supreme Court to any number of thanas around the country, to, of course, historical retelling of the story of Rupmati and Baz Bahadur, where it was nothing but music and poetry. And, without any sort of awareness of the euphemistic nature of poetry and music either. So this is where we're at. And I think when you say as feminists, how do we respond to this? And, that's a huge question. So I'll just sort of indicate a little bit my thinking on this matter, and then maybe we can come back to it later. But I think as feminists, the risk that many, many people who would call themselves feminists, and quite rightly so, the risk we run is that we tend to get co-opted by a certain kind of narrative of danger and purity. And then in that narrative, we opt for purity perhaps unmindful of all the strings that come attached to that narrative. And so that for me is the danger that we run, the risk that we run, and that we need to be much more aware of.
Paromita?
But I mean, I think I would echo Madhavi when she says, well, how do we respond to something as feminists it's a gigantic question. And it is in fact the most important question, because there's no one response. As feminists says, there's no one feminism. Yeah. And how do we respond as feminists is a perpetual question of feminism in a sense. So I think it's a very important question, and yet more like a kind of disco ball light to shine upon many responses than something that can be answered in a linear fashion. But to build a little bit from what Madhavi is saying, I think that maybe there's a real question to ask about the politics of visibility that we are so interested in, right? And especially because we are talking about culture which visibilizes, well, all art and culture which visibilizes the invisible in a sense. So what is it that we are interested in when we talk about visibilizing? And I think that the politics of visibility very easily gets intertwined with the politics of respectability. So I think that as feminists, we have to be extremely thoughtful about how to not fall into that trap. I mean, there are many, many examples of when we make something visible, we render other things invisible. So to be too interested always in this default idea of visibility may be something we can question as feminists, as artists, and as actually people who are engaged with politics. And I think that when we worry about the way in which a lot of feminist work sometimes gets caught up in this idea of purity, that's because it is caught up still in the idea of respectability. And that is because to a large extent, it is led by bourgeois or kind of liberal elite feminists. And there's a lot of work for people to do in terms of unpacking their grounding in respectability. I used to often, because this marriage question, the idea of marriage related to sex, having sex with each other, kind of persists, right? It persists in a symbolic fashion. It's an invisible question, even when people say that I don't believe I have to get married, because the idea of to be respected can only be reflected through the act of marriage or monogamous commitment. So we haven't really found languages to say that we will behave decently with each other without all of these external visible kinds of things. So I think how can we in our work undo these shackles of respectability and actually think maybe also care less about the endorsements of cis het elite men. Like I feel there's a lot in our society which makes them the people who will approve and them who will value what people are. And I think that's something we have to shrug off, right? So I think that also sometimes we do it in that flip side way of saying that, I will own the word slut, or I will do certain things which are outside of that respectability framework, but we do it in a very programmatic way. So also it becomes just the same politics of visibility. So at least for myself, I've been thinking about that a lot through the years, because this goalpost keeps moving and the visibility keeps constraining actually what it is that you can speak about, and it's unlimited and amorphous nature. I do think that at this particular moment, there's quite an important requirement to talk about to create more inclusive frameworks which are experiential, which are emotional, so that they actually elude this framework of respectability, visibility, programmatic politics, and so on. I think in our work, in the kind of things that we study, we would question certain things. So for example, we would question whether there should be more people included in the law, or whether law's importance in our lives should be actually reduced. Like, should our intimate life always be denoted by what the law says is all right? Or are there parallel domains that we care about? When we talk about queerness, what we are really saying is there's no one domain which governs our lives, and that there are many parallel domains. And popular culture in that sense is also, I don't want to get ahead of your questions, but just to open the idea that there is a parallel domain of popular culture in which other things matter. And if we make everything so homogenized because we are looking for the perfect politically correct object, do we in fact render ourselves so visible to state, conservatives, and others that we are completely unable to define for ourselves what a moment is, what matters to us, or who we are? So yeah, I mean, it's a slightly Pehlawa answer to your question, but since we just started.
I'll take that. Shiv?
I think Paromita and Madhavi have both wonderfully covered so much that we need to be talking about. But I just wanted to probably say from that, because your question made me think about how in the contemporary movement, this complex movement, we rely so much on legalistic mechanisms, perhaps precisely because there's so much of this law weighing upon us and controlling what we should desire, whom we should desire, how we should desire. But to me, the trap there is that then we respond also with a very legalistic answer, or that juridical mechanisms should be our savior. We should have stronger laws. We should, so even with the center, the workshop, we do a lot of workshops on sexuality, sexual harassment, desire, etc. And I've been doing that for many years too. And one of the things that's interesting has been that people come with set ideas to the workshops about understanding how they should desire vis-a-vis the law. And I think that's become even more now magnified with what's happening around us. And maybe as feminists, one of our responsibilities to really think what constitutes change. Is it solely confined to institutional legalistic change, or can we actually think about the more difficult work that feminism performs in relation to our lives and how change should happen in the world?
I mean, I think that's so right, Shiv, because and Laura Kipnis actually makes this point. I'm just borrowing it from her. When she says what dismays her about college students these days is that where a certain generation of people, and I'm going to include myself in that, were very skeptical and suspicious of paternalistic authorities and administrators and things like that, and didn't want them to have any part of our lives, let alone our intimate lives. Today's generation of college students seems to want more and more paternalistic oversight, seems to want more and more sort of administrative mechanisms to be in place in order to control what they think their desires should be and other people's desires should be. And that's a very slippery slope, because, and that, goes back to Nandita's question about what do we as feminists desire, because I'm sure a lot of these college students would I hope they would think of themselves as feminists, but their version of feminism is what in an extreme form is called carceral feminism, which is that we need the state to take cognizance of misdemeanors and punish people. And the entire language of desire or pleasure or even failure or mistakes or getting things wrong, all that just falls by the wayside. And there seems to be very little scope for allowing for mistakes for one's own or other people's, which is, where the law comes in. Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to add to that actually, because, because you mentioned Laura Kipnis, and because I feel I'm somewhere in between some of these thoughts, that when I read her book, Unwanted Advances, I was very keen to read it, as I have been a fan of her earlier work. And I felt a sense of a continuously shifting feeling with the book, where on the one hand, I would be like, of course, yes, echoing many of the things which Madhavi just said, that, you always want someone to come and scold somebody on your behalf. In essence, I'm simplifying. But on the other hand, I also found moments of disconnection with it. And I'm speaking very personally in that sometimes in the new language that arises around sexual harassment and violence, I do feel like, oh, did people of my generation not have that language, so we didn't really think about this? Or is it that we really were able to be more resilient? I think we were in some senses, because we had a lot more, I would say that, say, in my generation, my type of people, which were very few, we had also stepped away from many norms of employment and doing things in a more within our caste and class position. So we made some friendships with other women and other people that helped us to make a different sense of our experiences. But I felt this thing, that the idea of a kind of feminist person who is able to shrug off and who is able to say, like, there is a part in Laura Kipnis's book where she talks about how we were friendly with our professors. And I thought, well, maybe you were, but not maybe everybody was like you. So actually, what is the question, I would say, is that how can we start thinking about what is it that we want for ourselves? I feel there's a lot of feminism has also become about addressing men, addressing others. And it's not as much about addressing yourself. And I feel that is the real loss, right? So often, even when we make these oppositional understandings, which are true, I feel that somewhere we want to bring back that imperative of feminism, that I'm actually thinking about what life I want for myself, rather than how everybody else should become a good example. which I think has become the tendency, and that speaks to your question about purity, that the essence of feminist exploration and of centering the experiences of women and queer people and those who are not within the heteronormative frame, that is slightly getting lost into a disciplining urge for others. And I think, yeah, that is something to worry about, because if you're, I mean, you had, Kareem Khubchandani yesterday, and I was thinking it's so great that he reclaims this idea of auntie, because sometimes I look at Instagram reels, which are supposed to be on feminism. And there's this one particular style of reel where, no, people always saying, no. I'm like, was that your dream to grow up and be the auntie? No, I don't want to. Right. So also the concept of self, to have a pleasurable conception of self, pleasure and desire, not getting reduced to an idea only of within the domain of naked sex in a sense, but the pleasure of being yourself. What does that actually mean? I think that's a slightly lost language that we want to be able to reclaim.
So,
sorry, Shiv, go on.
No, I just want to quickly add, and not to drag it for too long, but because we were also just thinking about the college students and what happens of feminism within the university. And I think one of the things that also sort of irks me is that now there's almost this idea that feminists come with conviction rather than suspicion, and that feminism is suddenly supposed to be easy, which personally I've never experienced that. It's personally moved me in directions that, quitting my corporate job, not being sure of what I want to do next, but want to work with certain questions. And I think that kind of conviction sometimes worries me a little bit. And that idea that, suddenly feminism is very easy, it's not difficult, it's not going to challenge you in very profound ways at all.
So what all of you said very neatly brings me to the second round of questions: the politics of respectability, the politics of purity. And Paromita, like you said, there's the surveilling auntie on Instagram Reels. So I feel like increasingly online feminist cultures are driving us, pushing us towards a more and more kind of pure and respectable feminist politics. And I wanted to ask you for the second round first, that what role, and I know it's again a very giant question, what role do you think the internet has played in driving this politics of purity? And how do you think this kind of drive is mediated by caste and class in online cultures?
I think the internet, obviously an interesting word, because we use it as a stand-in today for many things. It's a technology, obviously, which has helped many people connect to each other. I mean, if I think of the way that I hear young queer people speak versus how older queer people speak, what their issues are, what they're thinking about, it is so dramatically different, because the internet has been there in between. And for a young person in a town where they may not know another queer person, at least to know what it is to be queer is now possible, as opposed to somebody being completely lonely and isolated in the past, right? So there have been all of these things, and I think that's also true. Like the diversity of populations has been able to come in contact with other things, and I think that's very powerful. So I don't want us to forget that. But I think today when we say the internet, we really often mean social media, and I do think it's worth making that distinction, because the social media is corporate owned. And that's what makes it different from the idea of the internet, which should be accessible to everybody. So I would say we must work extra hard not to conflate the two, because otherwise we'll fall into that thing which always happens, right? That the baby and the bathwater get thrown out. Oh, you think the internet is so bad? Okay, let nobody have any internet. So that I fear should not happen. But social media, which is owned by corporates, has this thing called community standards, right? So community standards basically will never include people like you or I. Like I have never been in any community as per their standards, because everything that we try to promote on Agents of ISHQ, it's like, oh, this is basically Ashleel. I mean, because now Instagram even has it has a kind of barrier to promoting posts which are about sex education. It's okay if the post is about sex education, but it should not then be about sexual pleasure. That's their actual language, right? So it's very, very, and because Agents of ISHQ, which is a platform that I run about love and sex, is almost 6 years old, we've actually seen the rules get worse and worse. And there's less and less that we can do today than we could do 5 years ago. So I think that's a clear indicator of how, even as more people enter the space and more ideas enter the space wishes to control more and more and more as much as it can. Now, I think that in terms of the fact that the internet or social media has a format, and you come into that format, speaks to what Shiv is talking about, right? That it's not so much that it's like you have to come complete into this space, because otherwise, how can you be counted? Like visibility comes from being a complete thing that can fit into that box. The whole of the internet has today become modular, like even if you want to build a website, it has to be modular. It's not easy to be queer in terms of the design of the internet. So the internet is like really into straightening things out. So if you want to trend, the internet will promote, social media will promote only certain types of things. And the more you are in the trending space, the more that will get promoted. So I think what it does to something like feminism, in order to make it accessible, it reduces the contents of feminism. Like feminism becomes a 5-point syllabus. Everybody can master it. Everybody can trend. You never need to know anything more than that. So therefore, you are now completely feminist. And the other thing it does, it allows you to claim, to actually take over other people's voices. In documentary film for a long time, it was always elites who made films about people who are oppressed and said, we are giving them a voice. And it used to be so interesting. It's as if those people didn't have voices, when really the thing was you didn't have the ears, right? So you kind of appropriate that political space and importance. So you also see today, elite women will do Instagram reels or videos about, I didn't wear bangles because when some boy was coming to see me or whatever, so that it would be easier for me to carry the tray of tea. But when you look at that woman, you know that she doesn't come from the kind of world where actually that ye laddu hamari beti ne banaye hain is kind of the norm. There is a completely new set of norms around arranged marriage. It may be as endogamous as ever, but the social behavior around it is no longer what it used to be. So there's also a pretense that you are in fact less liberated than you actually are, like it's a low-hanging thing. So I think that the degree to which capitalism dictates what is feminism, and which is the kind of brand conscious or brand friendly, a feminism that is easy to make into a brand, is really a lot of what the social media space promotes. But I think even for those who are a little conscious of that and trying to fight against it, the need for visibility is so important that they too would reduce themselves to a 5-point feminism, right? So if you start to, like, say you want to talk about books, every single person who wants to talk about books will end up talking about bell hooks, Chimamanda, some 1-2 other books. I mean, I feel like this is all I see again and again and again. So that mastering that syllabus is easy, and the ability to find something new gets deeply reduced. So yeah, I think there's a kind of cloning that occurs, therefore, that you become unconscious of because you get so many quick rewards. And it's hard to see that you're not actually getting you're getting a very limited freedom, and you imagine that it's a kind of power and importance.
Yeah, it's irresistible to quote from one of your own columns that I think social media creates a new, replaces the old template for Adarsh Balak with a new template for Adarsh Balak, but it's still the same thing that we're dealing with. Madhavi, I know that you're very deliberately steered clear of social media, but if I were to pose the same question to you, but in terms of the university space, how do we resist the drive towards purity?
I mean, I'm glad you're exempting me from commenting on social media, Nandita, since, as you know, I know nothing about it. In fact, one of my all-time favorite stories is one of my interviewers asked me one day, how do you deal with all the negative things people say about you on social media? And I said, I have no clue what those are because I don't read them, and that's the best way of dealing with them. But the idea, I mean, I'm going to depend on Shiv and Paromita to navigate this terrain, this space. But if we go back to that idea that Shiv proposed last time and that Paromita picked up on so wonderfully just now, of conformity, of conforming to a template that then is, you don't see as being foisted upon you. You think you're actually choosing it, but it's every bit as foisted on you as anything might have been in the past. And, I am a bit of a Luddite, so I believe in old-fashioned battles. I believe in actually yelling, actually shouting, actually narebazi. I believe in sloganeering. I believe in all that. And I don't believe in condemnation except with an edge of irony or sarcasm, right? I don't believe in cancel culture. I don't believe in anything that is just going to bring the guillotine down, because I think bringing the guillotine down is also bringing to an end any possibility of conversation or any possibility of discussion. Now, this is not the same thing as saying, oh, men must be given a chance. In fact, I was going to say in response to what Paromita said earlier, in a polemical way, I have always said, why are we still talking about straight men? I mean, our expectations of them should be zero by this point. We should be talking about ourselves. We should be talking about what we want. We should be talking about what we would like to do. So this is not about forgiving the oppressor or forgiving the enemy or anything of the kind. It's about trying to genuinely have conversations that might forge different paths for ourselves. And be aware of the fact that we are not holier than thou. And this, Nandita, keeps circling back to your original question of sanctimony, right? There is a sanctimoniousness, I feel, to social media. And I'm saying this very much from the outside, so please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But there is a certain sanctimoniousness which comes from the echo chamber effect. Because if you're not in the outdoors, and I don't mean that necessarily in Shaheen Bagh or in a Maidan, but I mean actually face to face, if you're not in the outdoors and hearing other voices simultaneously, then you're only going to be in an echo chamber of your own voice. And that to me is deeply problematic, because that's when the idea of anything that doesn't agree with me potentially kills me comes into being, right? Which is where you have the cancel culture, because I think this entire idea of cancel culture is also a sort of, is fueled by a lot of fear about self-preservation and a lot of harm, the threat of harm to the self. And if we try and recast the question of harm, if we try and expand the question of the self, if we try and insist on the idea of conversation, then I think these avenues can actually open up rather than close down in ways that they have, or they seem to have right now.
Thank you. Shiv, yeah.
Yeah, I was just first going to remark that, Paromita, when you were talking about the obscenity and these kind of binaries remain intact, it's funny because I was just literally trying to set up the internet at my place with the new Wi-Fi, and I put in the Wi-Fi name as inquiries. And funny enough, it picked up on the word queer as something explicit and didn't allow me to do that, actually.
Wow.
So I had to write to the company and say them, this is not anymore an explicit word. So, and that's in the US, by the way, so tells us so much about how we think of the West. But I think, and this is going to be really tentative coming from my own personal experiences navigating the internet in the 90s. To me, a lot of the current problem also comes from this internet becoming a highly stratified sphere, where I think one is always constantly looking to consolidate a particular sense of yourself. And just referring to what Madhavi was saying about the preservation of the self. And you see that, your LinkedIn profile must be the same as the Facebook, must be the same as Twitter, must be the same as Instagram. And, if you have a personal website, must be same as that too. And honestly, I think when in the 90s we were, and Nandita, you might actually resonate with it, when we were starting to use internet, it was Yahoo chat rooms, which were like this weird flux space where we didn't know what we were doing. We were actually exposing ourselves to a lot of dangers because we were talking to strangers. And there was no, I think, pressure on me. I think I've never been anyway the kind of person to tell my parents anything about my life. But there was, for instance, no pressure to behave in the same way in the real life as I would on an internet persona or a particular internet platform. And I think now there's that kind of pressure that you must be coherent all the time using these platforms. You must always present a certain version of your feminist self. And, to me, the dark side of it is also, that's why things like boys' locker room come up, because there's that, repressed things that are going to open up in these hideous ways. But I think that to me is really problematic because we didn't have that, at least I didn't have that when I first joined the internet. In fact, it was that almost liberatory aspect of, I can be multiple selves. I can be something on, on a dating platform. I can be something else on Facebook, and I can be something else entirely at home, in my professional life, etc. And now you also see that from corporations that, when you're getting hired for a job, they do these checks across your platforms. You have to actually, even when you're applying for visa now, and I think Uttarakhand or I think someplace in India too made this rule recently that you have to provide a social media address. And that whole verification thing that you're stable across these platforms really worries me.
Yeah. I mean, coherence is such a great word to use. It marks everything in any kind of sort of right-wing move. And I feel, we're very much in the grip of a right-wing move around the world, but certainly in India. from board exams where you all have to have the same answers to the questions. And if you don't have those keywords in place, then that means you're out. I mean, you literally knocked off that treadmill that's going to take you to a good college and then to a good job and so on and so forth. If you don't have a coherent self, then, you don't fit in socially and so on and so forth. And so we are rewarding uniformity at every step of the way. And if there are, and this goes back to what Paromita was saying, if there are so many rewards, it's going to take a strong person indeed to sort of shun those rewards and stake out her own claim or her own path.
I mean, I think one other thing is that this idea of verification that Shiv was mentioning is very important, because, that blue tick, which is an early kind of interesting object of social media, that you want a blue tick because that somehow validates you. And every single person that has ever worked with me is like, Paromita, why don't you have a blue tick? You should apply for a blue tick. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm just too cool to want a blue tick.
What is a blue tick?
A blue tick is like a verification tick that Twitter and Facebook, etc., give you to say you are the real deal.
Oh.
And perhaps it was meant initially because maybe celebrities had fake accounts being made in their names, etc. That may have been its origin, but then it became something aspirational for everyone to have. And, like that, I feel that kind of a thing of judgment inside me often at the thought of the blue tick, because I do feel like there's a kind of caste system of the internet that it creates. And then because it becomes the aspirational thing, everybody wants it. Like if you don't have a blue tick, then are you being considered unimportant? Becomes a kind of anxiety. So I think that the way in which we don't question some of those things that are formats, and those things are also told to us, they're for our safety. If you're the real Paromita, or the real X, or the real Y, then it will somehow protect you. But what does it protect you from? Is anybody with a blue tick not getting trolled within an inch of their lives? They are. Is their privacy not totally being ravaged by social media corporates, the government, etc.? It still is. So rather, like many of the earlier 19th and early 20th century questions around feminism about personal, private, public space, that the idea of women becoming a kind of subcategory of their communities and not having that kind of a right to a privacy, that the private life of straight men is the only private life there is, and they will decide their women and their children and their whatever ke bare mein kya hone wala hai. So similarly, I think we start creating these formats and then they become aspirational and you want to be like that, right? So I think it goes back to your question, and I think also question I see that what are the aspirational ideas we set up for ourselves and think that that's progress, whereas in fact we're getting herded in a way that we don't realize sometimes. And then, of course, because it becomes a means of discrimination, if you're not going to give blue ticks to handles that are Dalit or that are queer, then it becomes a matter of fighting that you have to give blue ticks to everybody. But I just feel like maybe the blue tick altogether should not exist or something like that.
My God, I didn't even know that I was officially unimportant.
Officially unimportant, voluntarily unimportant. I'm officially and voluntarily unimportant.
That's great. Okay.
So I'll quickly move on to my third question because I see there are a lot of audience questions coming in. So I know that all three of you are avid Bollywood lovers, and Paromita also mentioned the parallel domain of popular culture, which I think Bollywood is part of. And I think we all kind of perceived Bollywood as this bastion where resistance to the ideas of homogeneity and purity was still possible. But something that is happening in Bollywood in the last couple of years is on multiple fronts, I feel like these narratives that we're talking about are also seeping into Bollywood, because not only are Bollywood bigwigs sort of kowtowing to the ruling party, there's a lack of courage in the content that's being made. But at the same time, even the so-called kind of women-centered films that we have seen the last couple of years, they all kind of deal with the same. They mirror the conversations that we are talking about. That it's still the politics of respectability, the very kind of binary of violence and punishment. So I'm talking about films like Thappad, Chapak, Gunjan Saxena, the successful films in the last couple of years. So do you think I'm right in assuming that Bollywood is mirroring this concern with respectability and the notion of empowerment as well? Or does Bollywood still have room for queerness, desire, pleasure? Anybody who wants to take it?
Shiv, you should go first.
I think there's something definitely that's happening here, and I probably I can think of one anecdote whenever I think about films and what's happening and what's changing right now. And it's my mother who would always tell me that when she was growing up, and any film that had any Helen item number, that was simply not, she was not allowed to do that. So she and her girlfriends in college would always sneak out, try those number outs, try to, whatever, sing them seductively to each other and enjoy that, right? And something like Helen, and I'm a big fan of Helen too, and I love those numbers. And something like Helen right now would either A, be labeled as pandering to male gaze, probably embedded in a very sexist, misogynistic context. That's probably how people would read that now. And again, so I think this idea where, and I think this has much to do with fantasy and how that's now being devalued. And now we only think about the good films as the one which talk about real issues, is made in a realist mode aesthetic, is, I think, something worrying to me. And one of the controversies that I can refer to in the more recent past, which was Lipstick Under My Burqa in 2017. Again, the whole censor board statement was literally that, oh, this is a fantasy above life, women's fantasy above life, and somehow that's troubling. But I think that should really tell us a lot about how we don't take fantasy and don't take certain ideas seriously that Bollywood quite successfully used to think about for many, many decades until now. And all of that, all of those possibilities that I think fantasy or the element of sort of rapaciousness is now kind of boiled down to only very, very sort of, small set of issues that one can talk about. And then we label that film being called as a feminist film or a queer film. And that reduction of possibilities for me is quite worrying, definitely.
Paromita, Madhavi.
Should I go next?
Please.
Yes, please.
I mean, I think that, if we go back to this idea of coherence that Shiv touched on, maybe we also can ask ourselves why we have such a need for a film to cohere to one identity alone. That and there has been such a desire on the part of liberals to sanitize the Hindi film, but not only liberals. I mean, the history of mainstream, I have to correct also whether I'm really a Bollywood fan or not. I'm not sure that I am, though I'm often seen as one, but I just think of it as I'm actually a fan of songs more than the whole films, because I feel the songs are the place where everything exciting happened. But I also just think that there has been a continuous process, not only a recent one, of sanitizing the form of the popular film. And I mean, I'm using the word popular for lack of another one, really. That has happened with liberal criticisms. The liberal criticism, whether in the popular space like the newspaper or whether sometimes in academia, like academia also earlier only made sense of popular cinema through these very standardized Marxist frames, right? So like a kind of sociological interest in films. And it's only in more like relatively recently that other kinds of critiques or criticisms and understandings of film have been afforded to us. In reviews, even today, one of the first things that marks a film as good is that it doesn't have songs. And I always feel like, this film doesn't have songs, therefore it is a good film. It's so embarrassing that you would write this. Like, this is your way of judging something. It's like, he doesn't beat me, so he must be a nice man. It's the same logic, first of all, but in a much more terrible way. So I think, but there was a whole like post-globalization, an interesting thing that happened, right? Because it is again tied to the politics of respectability, that it's not just Helen, but in general, to like Hindi films was not something respectable. I mean, you were always discouraged, and there are many, many stories that people tell of when I was a kid, I would run away and watch films on my own because actually it was not the right thing to do. And even my father used to feel like, instead of doing anything to improve yourself, you want to watch that Sunday movie on Doordarshan, like, why are you being so useless? Although my mother's family was a film family, so it was a little bit more complicated in my household, but still. And I think in the 90s, suddenly, Hum Aapke Hain Kaun and all of those films created a new kind of world in which it was all right and cool to like Hindi films. You have Channel V coming up, which is kind of making English and creating these new languages, which are reducing that shame of loving Hindi films and making it kind of all right. But it is followed pretty soon after by the corporatization of Bollywood, the creation of the multiplex, which first makes us feel that there'll be a diversity. of narratives. And there was for a short time. But then it very quickly gets replaced by this kind of aesthetic of realism, which is supposed to be a superior aesthetic, which has no fantasy in it, although it is entirely a fantasy. When you think about it, what is realism except a fantasy that is interested in verisimilitude, but it's still a fantasy of some badlands and gritty realism. And who I, as a person who makes gritty realistic films, am a kind of edgy person, right? So I would say that even Lipstick Under My Burqa, to my mind, is that kind of fantasy of realism. I don't see it as a genuine fantasy of expression, but it is a fantasy of the filmmaker as being somebody who is close to the edge of violent sex, or sex which is kind of not necessarily exploratory, but always given a significant and symbolic meaning, right? So I think that that's really what has begun to happen over time. And so, yes, I think Bollywood films are getting emptied out of characters, of identities and other things. That said, I feel like every now and then, I'm unable to remember the name of this Ayushmann Khurrana film where he pretends to be a woman on the phone. He works in a call center where he speaks in a woman's voice. And now that was a very strange film in a way, because it's quite a transphobic film, because he's so horrible about the fact that he's seen as a woman, but he is a man. He has such a normative kind of fiance, and everybody who falls in love with him on this line is somebody who doesn't really fit in. But at the same time, there are many textures in the film that you never see in films anymore. Like his father at one point falls in love with his voice on the phone and then insists on meeting this false character that he's talking to. So Ayushmann, thinking that his father is a very Kattar Brahman, comes dressed in a burqa, but his father falls so much in love with this voice of Ayushmann's that he converts to Islam. He paints the house green and starts speaking in great Urdu and all of that. So I feel like both the things sometimes can occur. I mean, films can have multiple things happening inside them, not always in a comfortable or politically correct way. So I think like the urge for a politically correct object is not we may all desire it at some level, like, can I have my pleasures with my politics? That would be ideal, is what we say, but we frequently don't find that. So yes, some of the old Helen songs may be rooted in misogyny, but they're also rooted in tremendous expression and pleasure. There is queerness in the old films, but it is, of course, not at the center of the story. So, there are all of these mixtures of textures exist. And so I would say that today I go back to thinking often that, the more flexible frame, the frame of emotion, as opposed to the frame of identity, which is what films are now about, right? So they're very programmatic. And if there's about one topic, it's only about that one topic, and there are no subplots and this thing. And I keep saying now, that is why everybody's watching so much Korean drama, because Korean drama, like older popular films, is unwieldy. It's full of characters. It has large casts. It's very long, and it's drenched in emotion. So there's a lot of play for many different things, along with a lot of limitations of what there is. So the short answer to your question is yes, I think that Bollywood films have become programmatic and tremendously boring, and they are very instructive, and they also mimic the social media kind of idea of feminism. But there's many other, maybe popular culture is far wider. And I wanted to actually point everybody to one of the most fabulous articles I've read about TikTok, and it's on the website Riot, and it's called, I'm going to tell you the name, Workers' Playtime, a Definitive Guide to Proletarian TikTok. So I won't get into it, but I guess what we are calling popular culture maybe needs to undergo some kind of shift. Maybe we need to stop putting that mantle on Bollywood all the time in a default fashion. This real estate kind of approach that Bollywood will forever be the popular culture, when Bollywood has become so overwhelmingly a kind of elite culture, or Netflix is so elite. And there's actually dozens of other OTT platforms that we are not looking at. Or if you look at the queerness that used to be in old Bollywood films, which was so richly present inside TikTok, alongside working class identities and other identities, maybe the quest for a popular culture has to be renewed, and that we should not be searching in the old place for the thing which isn't there anymore, but where did that thing go is the really interesting question.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps on that note, I'll just take an audience question, which is about TikTok. TikTok used to be a popular space for the non-elite to perform desire and express sexuality as a trend. How do you understand, on the one hand, resisting feminism as a trend, and on the other, for it to proliferate amongst the most vulnerable? All the questions are anonymous, so...
I'm not sure I understand resisting feminism as a trend. I don't think feminism is a trend. I certainly hope it isn't. I think it is and should be a deeply felt politics lived by all of us. So I'm not sure the question, I'm not sure what the question means. If the questioner is suggesting how do we resist the trendiness associated with feminism or a certain kind of feminism, I think that makes a lot of sense as a question. And I think it needs to be, and this is to go back to, the Bollywood conversation that Shiv and Paromita were having as well. It needs to be messy. You cannot have a sanitized space of discussion and dissent and debate. Such spaces need to be messy, which is why when Paromita said, lovers of Bollywood are moving on to Korean drama, I am one among those. And I highly, 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 highly recommend Crash Landing on You, even though the title is so hideous. But precisely because it stages or overlays a certain kind of erotic, romantic, sexual longing with a geopolitical longing between North and South Korea, which I think for many of us, especially from North India, is very much resonant with the India-Pakistan politics and erotics. And that sense of longing or desire never being begun or finished in one person alone, but that it has universes that inform it, that it has multitudes, if not multiplexes, in which it gets expressed. That idea of feminism, that idea of politics, that idea of popularity, that idea of desire needs to be what needs to come back. The idea of churn rather than specificity, the idea of mixture rather than purity, the idea of multiplicity rather than singularity. The sense of the Bollywood films that you listed, only half of which I had seen, that sort of pride themselves right now on real life events or verisimilitude in that sense. I mean, it cuts both ways. That if you say this is the real life event of an X character, whether that X character is gay or female or trans or whatever it is, you're also then setting up a confined space within which those characters can see themselves as being recognizable. And so it just immediately disallows multiple other spaces from existing that actually do exist in real life, in everyday reality. Not every woman lives the same way. Not every gay person lives the same way. Not every trans person lives the same way. And so to now look to cinema to provide you with the cookie cutter that is then going to redeem who you are and give you that blue tick. Thank you, Paromita, for expanding my vocabulary. That is what I find particularly scary now, because cinema and Korean drama now allows you to literally fly on tangents that might have very little to do with your main plot, but that are absolutely essential to thinking about the churn in which we find ourselves on a daily basis.
If I may jump into quickly, just, and this is kind of adding to the cinema conversation too, but also this is the thing that I love about TikTok, the way TikTok is present as a sphere, that I think we also forget that this is what allows us to remind the so-called right-wingers that their idea of this is what our neat politics is, this is what we are as coherent people is completely false, right? And I think when Paromita was talking about songs, I remember that, and I grew up in a very conservative household too, and my parents would always treat films as this, social message template or these moralistic templates. But the funny thing was, every morning that we'd wake up at 7 a.m., there was Chitrahar on the TV, and they would be playing and enjoying the songs which were exuding desire, exuding pleasure. And my parents were completely comfortable with that, even though there was no, so to say, real conversation about desire, sexuality in our family life. And that's something I think we need to hold on to and remind our parents that, look, for all desire is bad, pleasure is bad thing you talk about in your avowed politics is not true for your own lives. You actually enjoy songs that go against all of what you publicly say about what life or what morality and this and that should be. And I think that's really, interesting for me for TikTok too, the way people sort of can think about gender fluidity, can think about queerness. And so to say, heteronormative people are not exempt from that. These are desires that they have too, and we need to hold on to that thing.
And I think there's a related question here from an audience member. Do you think shifting the focus from the politics of art to the politics of aesthetics would create more potential of queering even the sanitized cinematic portrayals in Bollywood?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, I was just looking at that question that, I mean, politics for aesthetics or politics of form, so to speak, right? And I think like another thing that like something like TikTok did, because it's a churn, it was so unmoderated and there were like so much, such plenitude. You know, I mean, I'm really curious for someone to understand why it is. I mean, I know that TikTok came on certain China-made phones, and so a lot of people could access it, and therefore, kind of multiplicity of voices and textures appeared on TikTok. And I think like one of the things that began to happen quite early, even before the ban, was that many elite feminists would sometimes say that, oh, it's full of misogyny. Like you'll find 3 TikTok videos which are misogynist, as if to say that you can't find those examples everywhere and then say the whole of TikTok is misogynist, because TikTok was actually very hard to, it was not neat, right? Like there were too many things in it. And there were just a lot of voices, which shows you that in fact, it is not the elites necessarily who are the vanguard of change, which is how the elites always want to present themselves, that we are at the vanguard of change and we will give the blue tick of who's liberated and who's not liberated, to also respond to another question then. And I think that TikTok overturned that. It was it's so much full of expression, and it was also not at all politically correct. Even when I first began to see TikTok videos, I was like, wow, I had no idea there's so much of this happening. It's and the article that I mentioned about TikTok, that the way that working class people used it even during the lockdown, the way that you had people talking about politics, the way that you see sometimes a housewife who would be the stereotype of not liberated, actually using it to express her emotions and to say a lot of things, shows you that actually the way that people live out their lives is always more complex than this politics of visibility allows you to see. And I think the idea that TikTok got banned only because of made in China, maybe, I don't know if it's true or not true, I suppose it's true, but there is also something else that made it, like, people were okay with the banning of TikTok because it was not aesthetically neat, and everything on Instagram then is trying to subsume what TikTok was, but unable to do it because it had that energy of popular energy, for lack of a better term, which is not neat, which is what the older Bollywood type of thing that we're speaking about, that it's quite messy and can be discomforting to respectable Bhadralok type of people, was very much present.
And Paromita, you have an excellent piece on TikTok as well, so I would recommend that too. But I just want to say, not in defense of the Bhadralok necessarily, or not necessarily in defense of privileged people, but you see, the point for me is not whether one is privileged or not. The point is what kind of language you're speaking. Because right now in our country, we're seeing a huge groundswell of so-called unprivileged people setting the agenda for how everyone should live. And so for me, they count as privileged because they all speak the language of purity. So it doesn't matter to me whether you're a rich person or a poor person. If you speak a particular kind of moralistic language of purity, for me, that is what privilege is. And so you can come from any socioeconomic strata, but if you are championing, as hopefully we all are here, a certain politics of churning and mixture, right? To go back to what Shiv was saying, even the 70s films were full of social message and, angry young man and this, that, and the other. But there were messages of inclusivity. There were messages of diversity. There were messages of multiplicity. And so when you compare those to social messages today in films, which are all about narrow bounds of verisimilitude, there's a difference between those two. And that difference is not necessarily who is writing the script. The difference is what kind of script is being written in every sense of that word.
I think I just certainly want to echo that. And I think just to go back to the question for the feminism, and I think feminism should certainly resist that kind of populism, where just the popular opinion sets the agenda for what our political lives should be, what our intellectual lives should be, what we're allowed to say, what we're allowed to think. And I think that's, yeah, just need to add.
I just wanted to say one very quick thing, which is, I know we're out of time, but I just feel like I agree with everything that everybody's saying. But at the same time, I always feel that, different people enter a space at a different moment, depending on who they are. And sometimes they do partake of some languages in order to have that visibility. So I'm not, like, I do struggle with that. I don't feel so easy to say that it shouldn't happen. So that's why I think the politics of aesthetics and a question about form should be foregrounded in the way we think, because it's a more inclusive frame.
I mean,
brought up, I also feel that, right? Like, I don't believe in marriage, and I wish that we can dismantle the idea of marriage so that there can be a genuine diversity of relationalities which are given importance through different forms, not only legal forms. But at the same time, for somebody who's been totally disallowed that space, if they really crave it, I'm not able to say that you shouldn't crave it. I mean, I think the struggle is bigger. And in the meantime, if somebody wishes to partake of what is allowed to people, it's not easy for me to say that, well, that makes you backward, because I don't want to be the one telling someone what is the right way to think somehow. I want to be able to express and have an inclusive frame, and for us to work together to do that, and then see what we will be able to undo.
This is why the humanities are every day superior to the sciences. Because when you're studying the sciences, you're told the truth, right? This is the latest truth about the sciences, and you don't need to know about the mistakes people have made in the past. You don't need to know about people who got it wrong. This is the right thing. Whereas there is no way you can tell someone, okay, now here is the feminist code, and now you're a feminist. People have to work through these things themselves. They have to go through the multiple stages. I think it is just recognizing that there are multiple stages that is important. Not, recognizing that you're not in possession of the truth, that I think is absolutely crucial to any kind of feminist politics of any stripe.
I just wanted to quickly check with Neil what happens at 2. At 6:30 your time? Like, does this window just shut down, or
do we all vaporize?
No. But we move on to our next segment after this.
Okay.
But you can tell me.
Okay, in that case, what do the panelists think? Should we carry on with a couple more questions, or should we stop right here?
Nandita, you decide. If you think there's a burning question with which we should end, you should go for it.
Burning question.
Burning Train. Does anyone remember that movie?
Yeah.
The good Kavali in the train was
exactly.
Yeah.
I think more or less you have covered
like
the questions. So yeah, I think we can stop here in the interest of time.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much, all the panelists, for this very, very generative and meaningful, beautiful discussion.
Thank you.
And it's always a pleasure to share time with Paromita and Shiv and Nandita. So thank you all so much. This has been great fun, and congratulations again to CSGS as we celebrate, completing 5 years with all our messes and all our messinesses along.
Congratulations to you all. Thank you for having me here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
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 Thank you, Nandita, for facilitating that. We now move on to our next segment. Before we discuss the very enticing poetry session that we have with Akhil and Aditi at 7, we have a very important person associated with the center. We have with us Samreen Mushtaq, who works as a postdoctoral research scholar at CSGS. Her research and writing focuses on gender and armed conflict, especially on Kashmir and sexual violence as a weapon of war. Her writings have appeared in Economic and Political Weekly, Contemporary South Asia, LSE Engenderings, The Caravan, Al Jazeera, and many others. Celebrating the center's journey at this Mehfil would be incomplete without discussing about this very important work that Samreen does. So before we dive into discussing your research, Samreen, can you tell us what exactly got you interested in the field of gender and sexuality?
Thank you, Shreyashi, for that introduction. I think it has, as you mentioned, it has a lot to do with my growing up in Kashmir, where a popular armed struggle against Indian rule erupted just around the time that I was born. So you just saw the war everywhere. It was hyper visible. The military was just everywhere, but you also did not see it in the sense that it was so usual and so embedded in the everyday that you would not really think it was any different from how it was supposed to be or how people live elsewhere. So over the years, there was this deep anxiety around militarization. And so I'd become really conscious, as many of the girls my age would, while walking across the streets. So there would be like a whistle here, a song there, a gun everywhere. And So those were things you had to sort of negotiate with every day. But then one would also, like, over time come to read how the Indian state would attempt to fix women and gender as these stable points of entry for intervention. Uh, so you'd hear of women empowerment and development every time. And in some senses, there was always this pitching of Kashmiri Muslim men as opposed to the dreams, aspirations, and progress of Kashmiri women. It was like to sort of invisibilize or challenge this struggle for self-determination. This card would sort of always be used to say that, Kashmiri men were the actual villains in the story, and Kashmiri women were the oppressed category who needed saving from the Indian state. So eventually, I got into a master's in political science, which is when I felt this need to, challenge these narratives and not accept this enforced silencing on us, to center the narratives of Kashmiri women, to center their multiple resistances to the Indian state, to make sense of all of these multiple experiences in politically significant ways. And also, I think, to write to stay sane in that environment. And as I engage with these questions, I do not really divorce my own lived experiences as a Kashmiri Muslim woman and my own subjectivities from this work. So in that sense, being here has been a political personal endeavor in a lot of ways.
Thank you, Samreen. So what I get also a sense of is that, your research also focuses a lot on how conflict sort of spills into the private, into the intimate lives. And along these lines, you do work on a broader project called Governing Intimacies at the Center. So can you explain to our viewers what this project is about? And can you just elaborate a little bit about what kind of research do you explore under this project?
So Governing Intimacies is a multi-locational project that it's a 5-year project that was started in 2016 and is ending sometime around the end of this year. The CSGS is partnering with the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa, where we engage with research on varied manifestations of gender in post-colonial societies. So it primarily looks at the question of intimacy. So the varied ways in which the states regulate intimacy and the practices of intimacy that sort of attempt to escape that status gaze. Now, as part of my work under this project, I've especially been looking at the idea of home in the context of cordon and search operations. And for those of you who might not be familiar, cordon and search operations, or CASOs, or crackdowns as they are locally called, refer to these counterinsurgency operations in Kashmir where the Indian forces close off an area and then go from house to house in search of militants or weapons. And what has sort of been a common story around these operations is that men would be asked to assemble outside in a playground or a grave or an empty graveyard, or a school, a school compound. So there was this gendered way of carrying out these operations where homes would be emptied of men, and so you'd leave behind women who would then be subjected to sexual harassment. And so the public-private distinction that is often relied on in security studies comes under challenge here, because the war is not just restricted to the battlefront, because these homes become an equal front line for the war to take place. And these then also become spaces that are primarily inhabited by women. And it's interesting how men are subjected to torture, they are publicly humiliated. A case in point being the Kunan Pushpara case in 1991, where men were kept naked on a cold wintry night in the snow outside in the month of February, while women were subjected to mass rapes in their homes, showcasing how the military sort of inscribes itself very differently on the realms of gendered bodies, such that women's torture and sexual violence occurs in this feminized private sphere. So in my work, I frame this militarized practice as producing a form of anticipatory insecurity where what happens is that there's always this fear of a certain uncertain violence, such that there's an anticipation of violence over bodies and homes. And that seeing a pattern of how these incidents have occurred over the years and how the military works, so you're almost certain that such an event will take place, but you don't really know how and when. You don't really know when the military will barge into your home. So there's always that certainty that such an intrusion will occur, and yet an uncertainty on when this military strategy is planned for. In the last few days, I think, owing to some discussions with people at the center, I've also been thinking of this in terms of the broader realm of sexuality studies. And this is something I want to work on now, to understand what intimacy means in such contexts of intensive militarization. In what ways are people's intimate moments sort of disrupted by violence, and what kinds of intimate bonds are forged through resistance in the middle of a war? So yeah, that's pretty much the kind of work I am doing at the moment.
And that's brilliant, Samreen. I think that really encapsulates a lot of the center's core research philosophy and research ethos as well. What possible directions do you think your research at the center and the center's research in general would move on from here, considering the kind of political climate that the world is witnessing? So what would you like to just elaborate on that?
At the center, so our research agenda is broadly aimed at exploring questions in the spectrum of gender and sexuality and their multiple intersections. Now, of course, we are committed to addressing these questions through scholarship as well as activism, and not simply, thinking of academia as an airtight compartment. And as you said about the political upheavals in the world that we've been witnessing, we do see how a lot of these questions are sought to be invisibilized owing to certain politics. So, for example, those on sexual violence and militarization, on sexual identities, on desires, on state power and surveillance. These are questions that are sort of becoming a no-go area because there are repercussions, and therefore, for us, I think at the center, and for me personally as well, engaging with these questions becomes all the more urgent. So I think state surveillance is something I'm currently working on. But as a collective project at the center, we are also setting out to do this major project next month onwards, which is to map the state of the field of gender and sexuality studies in India. The idea is to put together this open access resource directory that will cover people, institutions, resources, organizations, activists that have helped shape the field over the years. And we also plan to put together a report at the end of this that actually looks at the trends in the field and the multiple influences that have pushed certain shifts. So how a change in certain political ideologies, a shift from one party to another, also influences the way gender studies departments function in the universities. So questions like these are what we want to address. This will also be a resource for scholars, activists, to look up to when they want to engage with questions on gender and sexuality. We are also, at Ashoka, we are also planning to roll out a minor on gender and sexuality as an academic offering, and hopefully we should be able to do it the coming year. Other than that, I think, yeah, next year we also plan to have this a very crucial research fellowship called Tari for trans scholars. And then we have our usual, like we continue to have more workshops, we have reading circles, and we're also planning to have a conference which we're conceptualizing for young scholars to bring together critical perspectives on varied aspects of gender, sexuality, law, diversity, etc. So yeah, that's like the immediate future, the immediate plans we see for the near future.
Thank you so much, Samreen, for doing this interview with us. And we wish you all the best for your research work. And we hope more and more people get to read your work. It's very important and very, I think, urgent at this point of time in our political climate. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Last week, we also had an Instagram giveaway for our followers on social media who've been consistent in engaging with our activities. Three of the people sent us very interesting entries on the prompt that we posted for our followers. We posted the prompt, "What does desire mean to you?" And we asked our followers to prepare a creative piece around the prompt. So the three people who won these three wonderful books that are displayed to you on the screen are Ambika Nethani, Shadows _ and Size, Living on the Edge. We will be contacting them on Instagram as well. Before we move on to our next very interesting poetry session with Akhil and Aditi, we also have quick rapid fire questions for our Zoom audience today. Again, these three very exciting books are up for prizes for all of you. So the two questions that I'm posting to you right now, and my colleague Neil will post them on the chat as well, are: which Indian state is the first to legislate on preventing intimate love between persons of different faiths? Our second question is: name the law which is often used to punish public display of intimacy. The first person to answer both these questions correctly will have a chance to win any of these books. So we look forward to your answers on the chat box, on the Q&A, whichever feature you want to use. And we will be announcing the winners at the end of the poetry session. And we do see some answers coming in already. You can just post your answers directly on chat. Again, I'll just post the questions for the ease of the audience. Here are the two questions. I've posted them on chat. Which Indian state is the first to legislate on preventing intimate love between persons of different faiths? And the second question is: name the law which is often used to punish public display of intimacy. And you do have to respond to both of these questions correctly to win these prizes. People who've just joined in, I'll probably repeat the question once again. We have two trivia questions for our audience. You have a chance to win any of these books that are displayed on the screen. The first question is, which Indian state is the first to legislate on preventing intimate love between persons of different faiths? The second question is, name the law which is often used to punish public display of intimacy. I've also posted them on chat again, and whoever gets both of these answers correct has a chance to win these books. We'll probably take answers for another 2 minutes, and then I will call my colleague Neil to introduce the next segment. I think, Neil, we can now introduce the next segment. We've received a lot of answers, and we will be announcing the winner at the end of the poetry evening.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Shashi, and thank you, Samreen, for such an important conversation. We now move on to our next segment, and let me introduce to you two fabulous and dearly loved poets based in New Delhi, Akhil Katyal and Aditi Angiras, who will be presenting, who will be sharing some poetry with us this evening. And we're very excited for both of you. Aditi, are you here? If you can please see you. Hi, Akhil. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Just waiting for Aditi.
I'll just contact Aditi. You can probably just begin.
I believe maybe because we said
Wait
7,
for
maybe she'll log in a little bit later.
Yeah, I think Akhil can begin, and then we can have Aditi. Yeah, did that work?
Yeah, is that okay with you?
That's good with me, but maybe the session's at 7, so maybe people will join later. We can wait for them as well.
Yeah, I think then we can just take like
sure.
a 5-minute break and then join back. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. If this was happening in a physical venue, we would have some refreshments.
I have my chai.
Unfortunately, we are not able to. That's great. Chai is the best. For the viewers, we would like to request you to stay till the end. After this segment, we have the closing show by two wonderful members of the band, which you absolutely cannot miss. So please stay with us until then.
Hi, Aditi.
Hi, Akhil. The reminder said 5:30. I actually ended up joining at 5:30.
Yeah, we'll just begin in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, hi and welcome back. We have with us Akhil, Katyal and Aditi Angiras, two wonderful poets based in New Delhi and co-editors of an exciting book called The World That Belongs to Us, an anthology of queer poetry in South Asia, which we highly, highly recommend that you get a copy. Over to you both.
Aditi, whichever way you would want. Should I go first or should you?
Yeah. I think you can go first then.
Sounds good. It's wonderful to meet Neil again, who I know from Ambedkar University, and thanks to CSGS for inviting both of us. I'll keep it short. We both have 15 minutes each, and today is a strange, strange day to be reading poetry, because there's one kind of poetry which is very uh, uh, conventionally called out of you on days of great importance, such as Independence Days. And two big brother nuclear powered states are celebrating their Independence Day this week, our neighbor Pakistan and us. And I'm just thinking of what does one do when invited to a center which studies and sexuality and gender on a day such as this to read poems. So I thought I'll think about these two warring siblings, these two warring, interconnected, love-hating nation states, India and Pakistan, a bit. The first poem I want to read is called "A 20 megaton nuclear bomb will create a firestorm covering 6,500 square kilometers." A 20 megaton nuclear bomb will create a firestorm covering 6,500 square kilometers, and over days and weeks, a black cloud will keep spreading till it covers vast swaths of the subcontinent. ये दिवाली के लिए रखा है क्या? Prime Minister नरेंद्र मोदी, April 2019. हमने कोई शबे बारात के लिए रखे हुए हैं ये, former President Pervez Musharraf, June 2015. Distance between Delhi and Lahore, 409 kilometers. Distance between Delhi and Lahore on Diwali, 409 kilometers. Distance between Lahore and Amritsar on Shab-e Barat, 50.2 kilometers. Shab-e Barat, the night of forgiveness. Distance between Amritsar and Sargodha, where Nani was born, 276 kilometers. Sargodha, where she did not return. Diwali is the night of return. The night of lights is Shab-e Barat. The bomb, when dropped, is blinding light, hotter than the sun. There is often an embargo on what can travel between the border between India and Pakistan. And often art and culture and those who sing and those who write and those who act are the targets of that. So the next poem is also thinking about that. वो 1948 में जन्मा, मतलब पूरा पाकिस्तानी, कोई बंटवारे से पहले का नहीं कि किसी भी तरह उसको अपना बता ले। पर दिक्कत ये है कि उन सब रातों को कैसे भुलाएं जब उसकी आवाज में घुलते जाते थे आफरी आफरी सुन के, तब नहीं पता था नुसरत है उनके. And I don't know how many people in the room are fellow keen watchers of Pakistani dramas, and there might be some, and I would love to see if you could just like say yes or which Pakistani drama do you watch in the chat box. It'll give me a sense while I read you a poem called 10 Observations on Finishing Zindagi Gulzar Hai. 10 Observations on Finishing Zindagi Gulzar Hai. Okay, so Shreyasi is on board and the several, okay, so a lot of you have seen it. Perfect. So this will work. This will work well. 10 observations on finishing Zindagi Gulzar Hai. 1, heterosexuals take themselves so seriously. No? They are like queers plus 6 extra episodes. 2, a chai ka cup changes everything. IBID episode 17. Fawad, Zaroon keeps looking for a Seedhi Sadhi Ladki, Kashaf Nazimabad, leaving behind Tez, Chalak and liberal Ladki, Asmara Defense. Fawad has practice. He, Ashar, couldn't stomach Tezi in girls either, Sara, and went straight for the Sada, Khirat, 2-quarter home tuition teacher innocence. All this is still about 350 million times better than my childhood soaps, Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi, where everyone spoke like they'd just eaten bhoot jolakia, where Kapoor met Malhotra, met Mishra, met Virani, met Kapoor. Karachi rich are as obnoxious as the Delhi rich, but both have nice lawns that I want. Both say the word status as if they are Caesar's chhati aulad. 7, Amjad has the best dialogue in the whole show. मैंने खाना बनाना नहीं, आप खाना खाना भूल गए हैं. Oh snap, Mr. CSS turned into diddly do. 8, Samina Pirzada, unki Simi Garewal, has only one dialogue in 3 or 4 variations. Beta, abba hai tumhare. 9, post Ekta Kapoor, I expected heart attack, gamma ray, burst shots after every bad news, but they kept reacting like human beings. No one turned into a Nagin either. 10, there were 9 worlds that lived in Sanam Saeed's eyes, 3 more in her grip, 4 more in her size. 11, I would have married Osama. The thing about conversations between India and Pakistan, and whether it's happening as aggressive confrontation or whether it's happening as friendly overtures, is that what is common in both these conversations is that it tends to have a giant gaping remainder, and that is the conversation on Kashmir. And I'm so glad I got to hear Samreen speak as well and familiarize myself with her work. Because that is a conversation which both those who advocate for Indo-Pak war and those who advocate for Indo-Pak friendship forget to have. And there are so many different horrific stages of what this conflict has meant in Kashmir, the latest of which is the abrogation of Article 370. And I'm just thinking about, and just yesterday I was watching this film, Sher Shah, which come Independence Day, and of course there would be films such as Sher Shah and Bhuj would be seen as one extreme of it, whereas Sher Shah would be in that spectrum. It would be a politer but still a very moving propaganda film, and that moving propaganda where Samreen was speaking about the violence of cordon and search operations, the stop and check on the highways. And if you see Sher Shah, there is a moment in which Captain Vikram Batra, played by Siddharth Malhotra, during a highway search of cars as they're passing by, says, "Dicky khol dijiye, please." And "Dicky khol dijiye, please," this kind of politeness coming from a military apparatus towards the civilian is unheard of, but that's what propaganda does. It makes you into kind presences in a place where you are nightmarish presences. So to get away from India and Pakistan and have another conversation, find an old bag. Find an old bag, hold its flap open, shove in curfew passes, batons, tear gas shells, then throw in pairs of jackboots outside each door, then empty streets and stolen pen drives. Now shake it, make more space, then drop landline phones without dial tones and x-rays with small white dots. Then go find deep blue as it clots on the backs of teenagers, collect it and gently let it drop into the old bag. Let it sag with the weight, then go steal nitrates and dim disappearing hands, cram them all in, then close the flap. Now shake it, mix it up and take it and turn it upside down, undo the flap and see a word will fall to the ground. Read it slowly, normalcy. And constantly what will happen in these conversations is that the affective claim will be made on you, the moving claim will be made on you by citing the figure of the soldier, right? And both at the center of Bhuj or at the center of Sher Shah is the figure of the soldier. And you're not allowed to have an independent relationship to this figure. Your relationship is necessarily mediated through the state and in support of all the policies of the state, militaristic or otherwise. And I'm just thinking, what is the relationship that citizens of a country such as India can have with this figure of the soldier? And this next poem came from that questioning. To the soldier in Siachen. To the soldier in Siachen, come back. The snow is treacherous. Come back. They are making you fight a treacherous war. You were not born in snow. You do not know snow. Come back. I do not want you to fight that war in our name. I want you to rest. I want you to be able to feel your fingers. I want the snow in your veins to give way, for you to be able to breathe, to melt into a corner, to sleep. Come back. Go home. Go home to Dharwad. Go home to Madurai. Go home to Vellore, Satara, Mysore. Do not stay in the snow. Go home to Ranchi. That war is not for you to fight. That war is not for us to give to you to fight. Let not our name be ice. Let it not heave on your shoulders. Do not let us steal your breath. The people there, the people of the snow do not need us. They do not need you to fight. Come back. You were not born to snow. You do not know the treachery of snow. Go home to the sun, to water, Go home to village nights, to the sweltering marketplace, to the noise of family homes, to the sweat of the ghats, to the dust of the plains. Go home to rest. May you never have to see white like that again. May you never see a color become death in your very palm. And finally, as what one desires out of uh, the relationship between these two states, who are so young as far as history is concerned. 75 years is nothing compared to the swords that they have seen and they will see on days such as these, especially this cusp of 14th and 15th August. On days such as these, early morning, sky, a no man's blue, Vaga, not yet hostage to its evening clamor, is quiet, laburnum with hope. On days such as these, across an unsolved sky, the Azan at Badshahi and the Ardas at Harminder Sahib can hear each other. I will end with one poem which is much closer home in the sense to my own city, Delhi, where these conversations that we've been having vis-a-vis two big states or Kashmir have come home to roost, because anything that you do to others finds its way and is done to you in one way or the other, in greater or lesser fashion. Late one evening, behind a flying saucer and an octopus temple. And this is especially for those of you who've walked around in Delhi, who know the city with some degree of familiarity. Late one evening, behind a flying saucer and an octopus temple, I find a hill. In this city next to no ocean, the sudden anomaly of a view. I keep climbing to see the leftover sunset, the chance expansion of air, the houses cluttering like distant relatives at a buffet, and the slow tumescence of Nehru Place. The trees are now changed for the night, wearing a dim blue silhouette. The last walkers are returning. The sky every 3 minutes is breaking in an arrival from Doha or Frankfurt or Addis. I become greedy for even more and climb a boulder, a giant bunch of quartzite near the hilltop. Somewhere near me, a man asks his sons to wrap up their game. When they do not listen, he warns, "Chalo, ab andhera ho raha hai." The rock below me is so old, it translates it badly. Come, the dark is happening. The city spreads far away before us as if ringlet with omens. The rock is so eroded by water and wind, it can only tell the truth. The sons don't listen and the dark keeps happening. A black drongo drops below the uneven horizon, far away across a blackened city. Far away across a blackened river, this city eats its own. Far away across an unrelenting ridge, this city sends Natasha and Khalid and Umar and Gulfisha and Miran and Devangana and Asif and Sharjeel to jail. Far away on its edges, the rock now refuses to hold back anything it has seen. The city runs a nail to the ground around those who lend their hand, who offer a meal, whose hands are so able, they till each rock in the world and turn it green. They till each rock in the world and turn it green. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Akhil. I think all of us are feeling a range of emotions, especially on a day when, it's in the recent political climate, conflict has become more on the rise. Our tragedies are more something that we remember. And I think it's very important for all of us to really go through such poetry once in a while. Thank you so much. Over to you, Aditi.
Yeah, thank you, Akhil. It's been, 6-7 years of reading with Akhil, and each time it's amazing. I will be reading something that I've not read before. This is a prose poem a personal essay of sorts in response to this line that I read somewhere, which said, that if queerness is an escape from the limited imagination that this world offers, but then what happens once you get away? This is in 9 fragments, and they read like short stories. It's called "Will It Still Be Happiness?" She's sitting sunk in the sofa, just finished signing another copy of About the Change at the Kanakakannu Palace, and I'm at the edge of my seat, anxiously sipping a second glass of warm coconut water, waiting for my session to start, when she asks without turning her head, "But what about children?" "Whose children?" I say, looking up, wondering if this was a question for me or whether she was thinking out loud. "Yours. What if you want them? What if you want children?" "I don't know. But what would a lesbian do if they, a lesbian couple wanted children here in India?" "Not sure. But then to be able to have your own children." "I don't know, Jumain. Guess I'll never find out." Trivandrum, 2019. It's 6 a.m. and as foggy as my memory of that day, I'm on my second lap around the field and can't feel my legs or face anymore. A few minutes or hours must have passed and I can hear the church bells ringing up the hill. Girls in blue and gray start arriving and bunch up in groups of 3s and 4s. We are 5 days away from the annual sports day. I look around and run a few steps, stop, aim, and throw. I run a few steps, stop, and let out a scream. It takes me a few seconds to realize that I'm trying to pull out the metal tip of a javelin pole from my head. Every sound switches off and everything comes to a standstill. I look around and Payden's eyes find mine. I wait for her to run and come save me, but watch her run away up the stairs towards the staff room instead. I look around and everything begins to turn white and get slow-mo. I'm no longer sure which part of me is hurt or hurting. I tell myself that maybe this is what falling in love feels like, and I think I'm about to die. Darjeeling, 2004. Stanford University carries out a study that a new AI algorithm could tell whether you're gay or straight just by looking at your photographs. Isn't that something? One of us reads out loud from the morning newspaper. Isn't that something extremely problematic? Imagine the surveillance, the scrutiny, and all that this could lead to. I mean, yeah, I agree. Gaydar guillotine. I think that's what they should call it. The 3 of us meet at this German bakery in Paharganj for brunch once a month, followed by a few bottles of Kalyani beer in the afternoon, washed down by pale whiskey, the cheapest by late evening. We sit and discuss the books we've read, people we've met, who's doing who or what, and generally what's up in the world. Hey, look to your left. Do you think that man is gay? Or at least bi? I mean, he looks so nice. I really like the shirt he's wearing. Why don't you go ask him? Or ask your AI? Oh man, I do want that AI. New Delhi, 2017. Shefali has moved to San Francisco. This is what the third scroll of my Facebook feed reveals. I liked the post. We have not spoken to each other in years, and I have not seen any activity on social media as well. I had made up my mind that she must have blocked me after college, but never really bothered to find out. We had met when she was a 19-year-old dancer and I was a 22-year-old wannabe poet. I click on her name and reach her profile. 5 clicks later, I come across a photo of her with a woman and a young girl who appears to be the woman's daughter. I can tell that the woman is not just a friend. I sit up and start searching for more evidence. Hi pops up on the right of my screen and startles me. Oh, hi, such a long time. Yes, I got a notification that you liked my moving away from India. LOL. No, that's not the thing. How's everything? San Francisco, how come? We've really lost touch. Well, I got engaged last week and had moved here 5 years ago. Engaged? Really? The family got to you finally? What's his name? Varsha. Oh, wow. Yeah. After we broke up, I came out to them, got myself an MBA, moved to the US, and now here I am. Yes, there you are, doing exactly what I was afraid of doing back then. New Delhi, 2016. Sister Alice does not allow us to borrow books from the poetry shelves on the first floor, so every Wednesday, I settle in on the bench during choir practice and pretend to read Dickens or Twain. Today, I'm reading Sonnet 18. I don't understand a lot of what Shakespeare says, but I wrote down the words, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, in my diary. It's a cold, cold November day. I don't know what a sonnet is, but I do know that I want to write something. I want to be a writer. So I begin. He smiles like a snowflake in the sky. She smiles like a snowflake in the sky. I corrected, adding an S in case my parents or one of my younger siblings finds the diary. They will wonder who he is. Will ask if I'm friends with a boy, and I'll get into some serious trouble. S-H-E. I reread it a couple of times and suddenly my face turns warm like sunshine. I blush and I change it back to H-E. Not sure, no longer sure what will get me more into trouble. Darjeeling, 2002. I have just performed a few pieces at a private reading on a friend's rooftop in Satyajang Enclave. While the girl from Mexico shrugs off the shawl she and a girlfriend are sharing, gets up, and on her way to the kitchen tells me that she thought my poems were interesting. I return a weak smile, suddenly conscious of the fact that she was probably just being nice to my evidently nervous self. We're all gathered around a small barbecue-style fire and Alok Menon, smoking hand-rolled cigarettes and toying with half glasses full of gin and tonic. She returns and takes her place next to her girlfriend. Again, I return a weak smile, suddenly conscious of the fact that she has the most interesting eyes, as she looks at me for half a second and then forgets about me. A few months later, Facebook tells me that she is in Pakistan and had just had a baby with a husband. I feel betrayed for some reason and spend the entire day convincing myself that there are more ways than one to being who you are. New Delhi, 2016. I see Eileen walk towards me, mischief in her smile and a blue-black tote lunch bag on her shoulder. She comes and sits on my right, legs crossed, and takes out her tiffin box, and then shoves the small red Collins dictionary in my lap. Go ahead, read it. I look puzzled. I've marked the page for you. Appear at the dog-eared page and scan through the word list. Lesbian, noun, a female homosexual. What does it mean? What's a female homosexual? Whatever she is, that's what I meant, you know. She likes you in that way. So weird. So weird. Darjeeling, 2003. Even though I have read her for many years, I never owned my own copy of On Photography. We are on our way to Blue Tokai when I see it sitting near the checkout desk in the bookshop and decide that maybe today's the day. At a lunch date, we get talking about Sontag and Leibowitz. This is not one of my favorite couples. I'm more of a Vita and Virginia kind of person. So I listen to you tell me more about them. You tell me that they lived in separate but adjacent apartments and the radical intimacy of this arrangement. We discuss it for the rest of the evening, not sure if we're still talking about them. We're back in your room, getting ready to sleep, when you kiss me and say, promise me 2 houses, but only 1 bed. Gurgaon, 2018. Mrs. Gissing looks up from the textbook and asks no one in particular and the class at large. So what do you think about the ending? Us 13, 14-year-olds are caught off guard by this question. We have just finished reading Happiness by Guy de Maupassant, and I'm not quite sure what Mrs. Gissing is talking about. Do you think two people who truly love each other can find real happiness and comfort in each other's company? Far away, cut off from everyone and all civilization, she says, as if she's read my thoughts. Wang Di whispers, as if. And for no reason at all, I find myself saying, of course they can. If they like each other enough, then they must be enough. The world does not matter. But will it still be happiness if they can't share it with others, their families, their friends? Yes, even if they can't share it with others. I'm not sure I knew what I was saying then, and I often think about this question, even now. Darjeeling, 2003. I'll just quickly read one short poem. Strumundra. Hold me like a gasp. Kiss me like a hurricane. Cause me big waves. Show me Strumundra, big love. This is a war cry for the storm-hearted. Drink the rain. Shock the damn flatline, honey. I promise to come out alive. I guess that brings us to the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aditi. That was very heartwarming, I think, for everybody. Thank you, Akhil and Aditi, for doing this for all of us. I think all of us had a wonderful time, and we hope to be in touch, and we hope to keep continuing this again and again. Thank you. Before we move on to our next segment, where we play the wonderful band Apartment Upstairs for you, we had a rapid trivia before this session, and I would like to announce the winners for the rapid trivia that we just had. The first question that I asked you was, which Indian state is the first to legislate on preventing intimate love between persons of different faiths? The answer to this is Uttar Pradesh. The second question is, name the law which is often used to punish public display of intimacy. And the answer to this, as a lot of you pointed out, is Section 294 IPC, the law on obscenity, which prevents us from displaying any obscene acts in public. A lot of you did give us both of the answers as correct, but the first person to reply to this was Rohit Rajak. So congratulations, Rohit. You have a chance to get any of these books that you want to choose from. Thank you. We will now move on to our next and final segment of the evening. We have a wonderful band performance by the band Apartment Upstairs. Their bio is very witty. It says the apartment upstairs is very noisy, but we know we're in for a musical treat right now. And we're very grateful for them to sending us this performance on such a short notice, and we hope you all enjoy closing to this evening. Neil, if you can just play the clip.
It's a cold night that I've been sleeping in time as the breeze that moves the waves were slowly in my face, and the warmth of the world is present in your embrace. Just I just wanna slow down a bit before it all goes down. I just wanna see through your minds now. Blinding lights have saved me from cold stares. By faking smiles, I'll grace the stage, act unfazed. I want to be, I wanna be the star tonight. I wanna be the star. I want to I wanna be the star tonight. Now don't shy away, don't let the love stop you. Don't let the love stop you from singing those high notes. I want to be, I wanna be the star tonight. I wanna be the star. I want to I wanna be the star tonight.
Wow, that was just fantastic. A big shout out to Rohan Pai and Shoju Chatterjee for putting this together for us. Thank you so much. That was just wonderful. You can follow their work on Instagram at apartment upstairs, no spaces. And that brings to an end our Mehfil. Thank you so much, all of you who joined us, who stayed with us on a weekend especially. And we hope you will continue to engage with the work that we do in the years to follow. We wish you a very good night.